Good morning, Marco. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to do this interview today with you and review your backgrounds and learn more about your perspectives on leadership and diversity and inclusion. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this interview.
Thank you, Maria, and happy to be here this morning. I joined Dow in 2001, and I did a variety of roles in different businesses, geographic locations. And I must say, all these different opportunities which Dow was always able and also willing to provide me, excited me, and I grabbed them with both hands, and that enabled me to develop, and that also got me where I am today as the commercial vice president for our packaging and specialty plastics business in Europe. I would say my role model was one of my leaders early on in my leadership journey, Jane Palmieri, with an incredibly strong emotional intelligence, and she gave me some very valuable but also tough messages regarding my leadership style early on in my career, and that really ultimately enabled me to become a better leader. And she was incredibly honest. I would call her almost Dutch, Dutch. And her feedback really on the how and making sure how you become a more inclusive leader and create diverse teams and create a diversity of thought, ultimately having better decision making and better business results, is something which I really took to heart and still utilize. And it's also the reason how I got involved with the inclusion and diversity topic and many of our employee resource groups, like the female employee resource group, the LGBTQ, as well as the disability networks.
In our EPCA diversity conversations, we always say how much we need more men advocating for female talent to be developed. And you are involved in the Dow Women's Inclusion Network, WIN. I really love the name. You are co-chair of this network. Tell us a little bit more about this network. What type of issues do women share on their professional development? What are your learnings from this network?
Yeah, we did a survey in 2019 and we looked at the issues which came up, and a couple of them were the glass ceiling, really the inability to reach beyond a certain level. Another element was the promotion biases, either on performance versus potential, affinity biases, but also the element of over-mentoring versus under-sponsoring of female talents. So a lot of discussion internally, and ultimately we identified several areas of improvement on how we could go forward. And one of them is strengthening and diversifying the talent pipelines, really with respect to inclusive hiring practices, meaning that we have a diverse candidate slate when we go into an interview process, but also the interview panel, and setting up that standard process to really take the bias as much as possible out. But also investing in trainings, sponsorship programs. We started the EMEA female sponsorship program, whereby really the executive advocates for the female rather than just providing the advice. And one other one was the MARC, where we engaged with over 600 men who signed up in a dialogue program, which was designed by Catalyst, ultimately to create awareness and really hopefully to inspire those men to become more vocal advocates, as you were just talking about, for females and really drive to equity.
This network, which I found really interesting, also provides support in the private sphere of personal life. Very recently, we have the Domestic Violence International Day, which is really a plague, and it's gone worse since the COVID-19 escalated. And there's so much still to avoid. But what can companies and this corporate world we are in, what can we do to reverse this tendency?
I think the one thing the companies should really strive for, and this is at least something we're very much putting the emphasis on is creating an environment of psychological safety. And what does that do? It basically ultimately enables the person, female or male in that respect, to open up when domestic violence occurs and request help. Because without that, it's going to be incredibly difficult. On the other hand, there's another reason for psychological safety in our industry, which is ultimately opening up and talking and preventing ultimately accidents, because we're all drive to zero. And this is another element why it's very important.
It is estimated that 1 billion people live with some form of disability, and their employment rate is very high. What can companies do to become more inclusive workplaces for people with disabilities?
It starts with relatively simple things, which is making the workplace accessible to people, both physically to our plants, to our offices, but also with respect to the tools we use every day and we take for granted. But then also in your hiring practices, if you look in your overall diverse work population, you'll probably notice that, at least in our company, from a disabled perspective, we're not very diverse. So that's another element to attract that talent into our workplace, who at the moment will find it very difficult, and certainly within COVID has struggled even more to find roles. And we need to open ourselves up.
Recent interview by Dow CEO Jim Fitterling, he declared that no one should be afraid to bring their whole self to work. But however, a recent EPCA research found out that inclusive culture is still a goal to be achieved within the EPCA companies that were surveyed. In your perspective, from a runner perspective, how can companies still shape their environment to enable this diverse talent to really succeed? And what are some strategies that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think ultimately just having the conversation around diversity alone is not enough. That's not going to cut it. The inclusion is essential, and that's also where Jim came from. And companies that can make real progress, they're not just focused on building a diverse workforce, but they're really creating that inclusive environment where all of the employees feel they've got a sense of belonging at work. And the question is obviously, how do you do that? Well, that does require thorough change management at all levels. The first one is actually starting with a very clear ambition. And within Dow, we have 4 strategic pillars, and inclusion is one of those 4 strategic pillars. So the ambition is very clearly set right from the top. But then you need a very clear strategy as well. And in 2017, we created the Office of Inclusion, and with that also regional leaders to be able to customize that approach and make it relevant for each of the regions, and then ensure you embed it into the business strategies and ultimately set KPIs, because you need to hold people accountable, responsible for the progress, because otherwise it becomes a nice, but not really necessarily something which is really progressing. And that accountability, which also comes back ultimately through our financial reward at year end, the bonus, it's part of it, is in my opinion a very important part of it. But also role modeling, having very visible and credible role models who hold important roles, executive roles in the company, preferably obviously those people with profit and loss accountability or very strategic roles. What's really important is also not just the training for senior leaders, but also the feedback loop. So what we do every year is we give them feedback on their inclusive behaviors through a leadership effectiveness survey, where leaders have a chance to review basically the performance through the eyes of their direct reports. And that's very valuable because that is a very honest mirror in front of you, and that gives them the ability to reset some of their behaviors and continue to improve on that overall journey. I think an open, transparent culture is definitely one, but also a culture where humility, being able to make yourself vulnerable, allow sharing challenges and roadblocks to ultimately reach that gender parity. I think female leaders as role models is very important as well, play a very important role in all of this.
Do you think that our industry is doing enough to reach the next generations?
I do think that the industry has a very strong bond with many universities across the world. And that already enables students to gain that experience and kind of team up with experts in our companies within the industry to really get a feel and a sniff of what we're all about with respect to innovation and driving the sustainability agenda. How we try to inspire the young people is really three ways down. It's really through the work we do as a team, which really comes back to the decarbonization, the sustainability journey in many respects, and also describing the vital role our products play within society, be it through lightweighting, food preservation, and many more things where we contribute to actually decarbonize society. But also, I think equally important, or maybe even more important, is the people you work with, your colleagues. And I think that's where diverse teams, what we've been talking about, come in. And it's very important to create those diverse teams with those different backgrounds, different expertise levels, to ultimately solve some of those greatest challenges, because without that, it's not going to happen either. And then ultimately, I think it comes down to the culture and the place you work at, the third element, which is really that culture or the work environment, which we've spoken about as well. And what we try to do is provide greater flexibility. And we can all do that now through the digital solutions, which certainly with COVID, we've all learned to adapt, and even the hardest to resist have now gone to these methods of communication and embraced it fully. What we're trying to do is really shaping a different way of working, whereby flexibility is really becoming key, aligned to our values and the element of trust. And we really need to now talk about elements like working remotely and giving people the opportunity to design their day. That's how we call it, design your day. And that really is an element whereby the employee goes into a discussion with their leader to discuss their needs with respect to work-life balance and how they would actually want to design their own working day. And that greater flexibility hopefully further inspires, motivates, and creates further commitment with the employees to ultimately, obviously, have an environment where everybody can bring their best to themselves to work, and we all get more as a company out of this as well.
Women traditionally are more worried about work-life balance than men, because sometimes they feel torn between the demands of work and family, but also their responsibilities at work. And very frequently they need to choose between having a family and taking care of their family responsibilities, or pursuing a leadership position, which their male colleagues doesn't seem to the need to face. Do you think that this is changing with new generations? Do you think that companies can do more to make things happen in an evolution in this way?
Absolutely, and I do think it's also changing, and the elements which really will help drive that are flexibility, an element of empathy, and obviously ultimately equity as well. And if you keep these three elements in mind and you start to designing your frameworks as a company around that and enable people to manage their own careers and individual needs with kind of an equitable and fair approach, then I think you're getting a long way up. But also equally important is enhanced time paid off policies, which we introduced just recently to give equal opportunity for parental leave for birthing and non-birthing parents, but also volunteerism policies for employees to take paid time off and give back to the community. So I think the framework is incredibly important, and that's where companies have a role to play. And we definitely take that very serious, given also the policies we just institutionalized.
Men are more traditionally moved from one job to another, and women are more prone to relocate often to the definement of their own career. However, millennial women are becoming less willing to follow their partners, do you think, especially in the case they earn more than men, of course? Do you see this changing, or do you see this being an issue in your organization?
We definitely see it, but what we try to do is we actually try to create the same opportunity for both the female and the male. So when we have a couple at Dow who both work at Dow, and the female or the male has been asked to relocate to another location for a new role, then we make sure that the other partner is offered an opportunity within that setting as well, to enable the family as such to make that move. So I think there is a role for the company to play to enable this. We have 33% of females in leadership positions. And it's actually something which we're making progress on. Is it quick enough? That would be your logical follow-up question. Probably not. We still have a long way to go, obviously, but progress is there. And I would say it's not a sprint, but it should also not excuse us from doing nothing. And we need to make year-on-year progress. And this comes back to setting the KPIs and making it part of the financial reward at year end for all of the employees as well. I've been involved for the last decade into female diversity particularly, and it's really difficult to move the needle, and I only see that happening in the last couple of years where you really see more the tone changing in many companies at the top of the house. It becomes a very clear goal within how they report out to their stakeholders. And when you start to do that and you start to measure and hold people accountable, then things happen.
There are many challenges for our petrochemical industry in this post-pandemic period, and we need to do more to meet customer and society's expectations on sustainability, which is increasing, fortunately, and we need to be part of this transition. What can we do more? How can we still improve in meeting society's expectations on sustainability?
We both know the pressures with respect to driving not just decarbonization, but also circularity and the role our industry plays. I believe that is a phenomenal opportunity. And I think the companies who are able to embrace this and are determined to really see sustainability as an opportunity and invest in it, in those elements of decarbonization and circularity, those will be the winners. Ultimately, to make this happen, it will require a great deal, first of all, of courage, because not everything is crystal clear yet, determination, new ways of working with each other, and an element of innovation which we haven't seen before. And that element of innovation and solving some of the bigger challenges, that brings us back to what we've just been discussing about. You need that inclusive and diverse teams to solve some of those very challenging ideas. And only at that point you can come with the innovation which society needs.